I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, The Financial Barbarians at the Gate. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Why do you now say that your seminal book published in 1972, Super Imperialism, should have been titled Monetary Imperialism?
Because super imperialism sounds sort of pop, and the form of imperialism that America did is different from the kind of imperialism that people think of in terms of European colonialism. Unlike England, the United States didn't have to invade countries, at least before the oil grab in Iraq and the Near East. It got a free ride and drained other countries by the international monetary system's workings. As long as foreign countries kept their reserves of the central banks in the form of treasury bonds, this meant that however much foreign countries would export and earn on balance, they would lend to the U.S. Treasury, which would finance the U.S. balance of payments deficit, and this would also finance the budget deficit, because the foreign central banks became the largest buyers of U.S. Treasury bills, so that Americans didn't have to finance their federal government's budget deficit. Now, half of the federal government's discretionary spending, as Ralph Nader pointed out a few weeks ago, is military in character. So foreign central banks, by keeping their reserves in dollars, essentially finance the U.S. Government's military spending throughout the world, surrounding them to prevent them really from trying to break away from this exploitative free lunch that we're getting by the fact that we print paper dollars and we get their exports, American investors get to buy their industry, and all they get are paper dollars in amounts that can never, ever be repaid. So that while the United States insists that third world countries and other countries repay its debt to it, it has no intention ever of repaying its debt to them. It's a free ride, and it's a purely exploitative relationship.
Well, speaking of the dollar, there's been talk lately, particularly from China, but a few other countries, of replacing the dollar as the global reserve currency and coming up with some sort of a fictitious currency that would sit on top of all of the national currencies and be used, I guess, for international trade, etc. What do you think of this idea?
There's a myth that the balance of payments deficit is trade. It's not trade, it's military. When they say finance America's trade deficit, what they mean is our military spending abroad. Don't use the euphemism of trade deficit for our military spending and our empire building and our aggressive wars in the Near East. So it's military. What China did basically was saying, we want to avoid getting any more dollars. We know that America is not going to pay the $2 trillion that we have. We know that America is running a trade deficit, and it's running a military deficit as well. So that about a month ago, when Coca-Cola tried to buy China's largest fruit juice distributor for, I think, a few $billion, China said, no, we're not going to give away our companies for your damn paper. If we let Coca-Cola buy our fruit juice distributor for $2 billion, the local Chinese seller is going to turn this dollar inflow over to the central bank in order to get our domestic currency, the yuan. The central bank is then going to have to decide what to do with this $2 billion, and it will buy treasury bills to finance the government, to surround us with atom bombs and armies to try to invade us if we ever say, no, we don't want any more of your damn dollars. So of course they said no. They wanted to stop America's military aggression. And China's aim is primarily just to be left in peace without being attacked militarily. The U.S. government is threatening the whole world militarily by saying, if you do not accept our dollars, we will treat that as an act of war. And in 1974, Herman Kahn and I went down to the White House and met with the Treasury when the Treasury Secretary explained to us that they told OPEC OPEC that OPEC could charge whatever it wanted for its oil, but it had to invest all of its profits on the oil back in the United States. If it didn't, that would be an act of war, and we would kill them, and there would be a revolution. That is the new imperialism, that America will make a revolution, murder elected leaders, as it did in Chile, if they choose not to export to the United States for dollars, or if they refuse to accept dollars in exchange for their industry. This is utterly imperialistic system. It works through the monetary system, and it is a quid without quo. It's purely a free lunch, and the U.S. government has fought any monetary reform because it wants to continue to get a free lunch, mainly because without the free lunch, it could not afford the military bases that it's putting all over the world to threaten other countries to remain in the American monetary system.
Right, but what about these comments about getting rid of the dollar as the reserve currency? I read somewhere in the paper that even Geithner, the head of the Treasury, sort of slipped up and said, well, maybe they'd go for a new kind of international reserve currency, and then he retracted his statement. So are you saying that there's no way that the United States would ever agree to such a thing?
There's one way the United States would agree to it, and that is if foreign central banks would take their treasury bills and essentially turn them into the IMF in exchange for what's called paper gold, which would be IMF play money. The IMF would then tear up all of the treasury bills, so the U.S. would no longer owe $4 trillion to foreign central banks. It would owe nothing to foreign banks. And instead, foreign banks would get play money to exchange this paper gold. The United States would love that. That's the only kind of alternative IMF currency it would accept. Obviously, foreign countries, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, will not go along with this because their whole idea is to reform the monetary system to prevent America's military attack on them.
Okay, so you're saying that either way it wouldn't make any difference. We're still talking about U.S. imperialism through the monetary system.
That's correct.
Do you think that the game is over in terms of neoliberal economic policies imposed on the rest of the world?
You don't know. The government is trying to prevent any alternative from being voiced, and it has the support of the economics profession, which is almost entirely in the hands of neoliberals from the Chicago School and the Harvard Economics Department, the far right of the political spectrum. And as long as people are not informed that there is an alternative, namely classical economics, and as long as they're not taught economic history, as long as they can censor economic thought from the academic curriculum, people are not going to have any idea of what Adam Smith or Ricardo or John Stuart Mill or Henry George or Marx really wrote at all, and they'll believe that there's only one kind of economics, and that's the neoliberal, really neofeudal economics that's taught by the Chicago School. As long as the financial sector can block a knowledge of the alternative, people will feel that there's no alternative.
Is the expansion of fictitious capital, that is the FIRE sector, finance, insurance, and real estate, an inherent characteristic of capitalist development? I hear a lot about the falling rate of profit being at the root of the financialization of the economy today. Do you think this is true? And in your opinion, was it inevitable?
It certainly was not inevitable. Matters didn't have to be this way, and they don't have to be this way. The financial and real estate sector basically are a legacy of the military conquests that shaped feudal Europe. The land rent is largely the legacy to a landed aristocracy that were the heirs of the military warlords and vandals who took over most of the European countries. And as I mentioned, the private banking was a legacy of the Crusades and of the war lending that shaped European kingdoms in the Middle Ages. I don't like to use the word falling rate of profit because the term itself is a Marxist term. And when Marx used it, he expected the Industrial Revolution to have more and more capital investment per unit. He thought that labor productivity would rise steadily by technology embodied in more and more capital per worker.